Iran is at war. Cities have been bombed. Air defenses have been shattered. Its leadership has been killed. And somewhere in Beijing, officials are watching and quietly calculating what they stand to gain.
Because while everyone is watching missiles and warships, China is doing something far more strategic. It is buying cheap oil, rebuilding Iran's military, and reshaping the Middle East without a single Chinese soldier setting foot on a battlefield.
This is The Exchange Show. I'm Alex.
And I'm Sarah. Two sides, one truth. Let's get into it.
To understand what China is doing right now, you need to go back to 2021.
That is when China and Iran signed what they called the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, a 25-year cooperation deal. The basic terms: China invests up to $400 billion in Iran's oil, infrastructure, and manufacturing. In exchange, Iran supplies China with heavily discounted oil for the next quarter century.
But hold on, $400 billion sounds enormous. Has China actually paid that?
That is exactly the right question to ask. The honest answer is not fully. The deal has moved slowly.
Western sanctions have made major Chinese state-owned banks reluctant to invest directly. But here is what has happened. The oil trade did not wait for the paperwork. By 2024, more than 90% of Iran's oil exports were going to China. When the conflict escalated in 2025 and 2026, that figure held, and Iran became almost completely economically dependent on Beijing.
So even before the war, Iran had already handed China enormous leverage over its economy.
Correct. And that leverage did not come through military force. It came through oil purchases, trade, and a long-term agreement that quietly locked Iran into China's orbit.
Let's talk about the moment that changed everything in this relationship. March 2023, Beijing. China brokered a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, two countries that had not had formal diplomatic relations for 7 years, countries that had been fighting proxy wars across Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon.
It was a genuinely historic moment, and it happened in Beijing, not Washington, not Brussels, Beijing. China's top diplomat, Wang Yi, stood between the Iranian and Saudi security chiefs and announced what he called a victory in dialogue.
And I think people in the Gulf understood the significance of that more than anyone.
Because for decades, the United States had positioned itself as the security guarantor of the region. And here was China, a country that officially does not take sides, doing something Washington had tried and failed to do.
To be fair to the analysis here, China was not the only broker. Iraq and Oman had been hosting quiet talks for years. Both Iran and Saudi Arabia had their own reasons to want de-escalation. But China provided something crucial: the guarantee that made the deal stick. Both sides trusted that Iran would not risk breaking a deal made under Chinese auspices.
Because Iran cannot afford to lose China.
Which is exactly what gives Beijing its quiet power in all of this.
Now let's look at the military dimension, Fevity, because this is where China's role becomes far more complicated and contested.
The U.S. has been tracking this closely. According to the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, China has been supplying Iran with dual-use materials, specifically sodium perchlorate, a key ingredient in solid-fuel ballistic missiles. In January 2025, 2 Iranian cargo vessels left Chinese ports carrying over 1,000 tons of the substance. More shipments followed after the conflict began.
China officially denies that these materials are for weapons. And it is worth being precise here, these are precursor chemicals, not missiles. But Israel had specifically targeted Iran's missile production sites in 2024, and reports suggest China has been helping Iran rebuild that capacity.
Then there's the satellite question. A Chinese commercial satellite company, Changwang Satellite Technology, has been providing targeting imagery to Houthi forces in Yemen. The company has ties to China's military intelligence. The U.S. sanctioned it, and yet, according to reports, the satellite data kept flowing.
So China's position publicly is, we are not a party to this conflict, we call for a ceasefire, we support dialogue. But underneath that diplomatic language, there is a flow of materials and data that has helped Iran and its allies sustain their military capacity.
And Beijing's response to U.S. pressure on this, they have called the sanctions illegal.
Yeah.
They have denied the weapons allegation.
And they have continued buying Iranian oil.
So let's ask the harder question.
Why is China doing this? Is this about ideology? Is it about genuinely supporting Iran? Or is this pure geopolitical calculation?
It is almost entirely calculation. Let's separate it into three layers.
The first layer is energy. China is the world's largest energy consumer. More than 90% of Iran's shipped oil goes to China at a discount. That is cheap energy for China's economy, and it bypasses Western pricing and supply chains.
The second layer?
Geopolitical distraction. Every dollar, every hour, every diplomat, and every warship that the United States commits to the Middle East is one less resource available to counter China in the Pacific. The longer this conflict continues, the more stretched American attention becomes. China does not need to fire a missile to benefit from that.
And the third layer?
The dollar.
China has been pushing for years to reduce global dependence on the US dollar in international trade. Iran, locked out of the dollar-based financial system, is a willing partner in testing alternative payment systems. Yuan-denominated oil transactions, alternative banking channels. Every successful workaround is a proof of concept for a post-dollar trade architecture.
That is a significant point for Gulf audiences specifically.
Because if oil can be priced and traded outside the dollar system, blankare, that changes the economic reality for the entire region.
Now, I want to push back on the narrative that China is simply winning, because there are real limits and real costs to this strategy, and the Iranian people are living them.
That is a fair challenge. The trade relationship is deeply imbalanced. In 2024, bilateral trade was about $13 billion. China exported nearly $9 billion in goods to Iran. Iran exported just over $4 billion back, mostly raw materials and oil. Iran is effectively selling its natural resources and buying finished products. That is not a partnership of equals.
And on the ground in Iran?
Chinese goods have flooded Iranian markets. Critics describe China as benefiting from Iran's isolation rather than genuinely helping it escape it first. One Tehran-based trade expert described it simply: China is bartering for Iranian oil with cheap consumer goods.
中方高度关注中东局势的发展，希望实现
And yet, China also has limits. When Israel began striking Iran directly in June 2025, China did not send weapons, did not send troops, issued statements, called for ceasefire. Xi Jinping proposed a 4-point peace framework, but Beijing drew a clear line between diplomatic support and military entanglement.
That line may be moving, however. Reports as recent as April 2026 suggest China was preparing to ship man-portable air defense systems to Iran through third countries. China denied it.
But the direction of travel is clear, Pafle. The relationship is deepening.
So where does this leave us? What is the bottom line on China's position in all of this?
China has pulled off something remarkable. It has positioned itself as a neutral mediator while simultaneously being Iran's economic lifeline, its diplomatic shield at the UN, and increasingly, its military supplier.
And none of that required a single Chinese soldier to pick up a weapon.
But here is the counterpoint. China is not all-powerful here. The 25-year deal has moved slowly. Major Chinese companies are still reluctant to invest fully in Iran because of sanctions risk. And there are genuine tensions. In December 2025, China and the UAE issued a joint statement supporting the UAE's claims to disputed Gulf islands. Iran summoned the Chinese ambassador in protest.
So China is walking a tightrope. It needs Iran's oil. It needs stability in the Gulf. Saudi Arabia alone has nearly $110 billion in annual trade with China. Iran's trade is $13 billion.
China is not choosing sides. It is choosing interests.
And right now, its interests align more with keeping Iran alive and dependent than with seeing any particular outcome in this conflict.
The story of China and Iran is ultimately the story of a new kind of power. Not the power of armies, the power of dependency, economic, technological, diplomatic.
China is a bit of a fair weather friend when it comes.
China has made Iran need it.
China is an export-driven economy.
And that need is the source of Beijing's leverage across the entire region.
Whether that leverage is used for peace or for pressure, that is the question that should concern every government from Riyadh to Washington.
That is The Exchange Show. If this gave you something to think about, bro, share it.
And come back next time. Two sides, one truth.